welcome to this conversation that we are having in this era of the Black response. At colorofchange.org, we have been working incredibly hard to build the type of energy and collective action it's going to take to not only get us through this moment of Corona, but to find ways for us to flourish in the aftermath. The blackresponse.org is the action hub that we have developed to allow us to be able to translate the presence of Black issues into the power to actually change the rules. I am in uptown New York right now. It is very quiet here. All we sort of hear are the sirens up and down the streets as our hospitals fill up. While that is happening, so many of us are having to translate our everyday actions, things that we were doing in our real lives, from connecting with family and friends, to our religious services, to our work, from offline to online. And online spaces have not always been friendly to Black folks. They have not always been friendly to women, have not always been friendly to those at the intersection of so many different marginalized experiences. And while we've been moving our existence online, so many of those fault lines have emerged. The term Zoombombing has become part of the lexicon because across so many different spaces, we have seen white nationalists organize offline and other non-Zoom spaces to infiltrate Zoom spaces, building sort of strategies that have focused on disrupting our ability to come together, to communicate, and to have conversation. So many different spaces, from conversations within religious institutions to civil rights conversations and LGBT gatherings, have all been disrupted. One disruption that happened that really came to the forefront for us as an organization was a disruption that happened to a gathering of the Daughters of the Movement. The Daughters of the Movement are a collective of visionary, talented, and creative women who have been part of the civil rights movement and part of the civil rights struggle, not just through their own everyday work, but through the work of their parents, growing up literally in the movement, at the steps, at the sort of feet of their parents, who were making so many sacrifices for our collective liberation. At Color of Change, we have been working on a campaign to fight Zoom, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on, to push Zoom to take real action. Last week, we had a meeting with Zoom leadership, but here we want to have a conversation to really dig into not just the work of the Daughters of the Movement, but actually sort of why, how their space was infiltrated, why it was infiltrated, and have them talk a little bit about sort of the work that they're doing. I want to use this space not just to talk about the work to challenge Zoom and to challenge technology platforms, but also give a space to these incredible women to tell their story and to talk about their work. So please join me in welcoming Gina Belafonte, who has spent her life in entertainment and activism, where her professional work thrives today. She's the youngest child of Julie and Harry Belafonte, whose impact in these fields is among the most influential and progressive in the world. Keisha Sutton, the granddaughter of the Honorable Percy Sutton. She's a creator who engages audience with topics that are relevant to culturally rich communities and women. She has spent over a decade in management at Inner City Broadcasting Corporation, where she built the company's digital platform. Dominique Sharpton Bright, an actress and producer, and the National Director of Membership at the National Action Network, and the daughter of Reverend Al Sharpton. Hesna Muhammad, a visual artist, writer, educator, whose work focuses on family, social justice, education, and human condition. She is the daughter of Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee. And Suzanne Kay, she's a writer, filmmaker, of documentaries and so much more. She is the daughter of Diane Carroll. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us and giving us this opportunity to share what happened to us and to elevate this issue.
Thank you. Actually, why don't you start us off, Gina, and say a little bit about sort of what happened. I'd love for everyone else to sort of chime in, sort of both with their reactions and sort of what they were experiencing as it was taking place. For people who are watching who haven't had this experience, for people who maybe have never had an experience or don't have to live with the challenge of having their spaces disrupted, this is nothing new for you all. The stories of it and the experience of it is nothing new, but in the digital space, it is a little new. And so talk a little bit about that.
Well, again, thank you so much for having us. The Daughters of the Movement are a collective of 7 women who, who came together to be in community, to share our wisdom, our legacies, our stories, and we thought, given this moment where we're finding physical distancing and a lot of people are turning to the internet to find ways in which to connect, we thought we would do a presentation and offer our stories and our humor and our wisdom around a host of issues, but also about some of the traumas that we're all experiencing now in this quote unquote new normal. So we came together last Thursday and we had an event, and we had some technical issues coming on at first, figuring out, sort of getting the kinks out for ourselves. And once we got underway, we really were enjoying the spirit of telling our stories when all of a sudden, in the chat area in particular, there were some extremely vicious and violent attacks verbally to us. And then not all of us were on the same page, because in Zoom, there's only so many can be on a page. And then so we had about 3 to 4 pages of people who were joining us. And so on other pages, we began to hear the voices of people in their videos. And we thought, oh, someone must have just accidentally come into our space, is actually how it started. We first started hearing things, and then the chat area started to get clouded with, unmute us and let us in and put on our videos. And then all of a sudden we heard that there were white men who were masturbating on video. And also one of them put their butt cheeks up to the camera and spread them open. And there was just very hateful messaging, calling out names, being extremely vulgar and vicious. And so we were doing our best to, oh my goodness, what's happening? And try and, I personally tried to just type in the word love over and over again to sort of break up some of the vicious attacks. And our host, For Freedoms, was then also at that time tried and did, as quickly as they possibly could, get rid of the people. We were all, I think, trying to send them the names of the people who were in the chat so that they could identify who was who and get rid of them. It was traumatizing and it was so disruptive. But I will say, in true Daughters of the Movement fashion, we came together, we regrouped, we centered our community, and we ended in a very positive and beautiful way.
I just, it wasn't until I wasn't watching the chat as much, so I didn't see all of the language that was coming up, but it was really, and then, I was able to see some of it, and also we were able to retrieve it. It was incredibly hateful. I want to rape you. You can't say this, bitches, you can't F and B. All this stuff about, what we look like and what our body parts are for in terms of, serving them. One guy was masturbating on the chat live. And I just, my reflection afterwards, and I had to tip my hat to Gina for centering us around love and addressing their hate with love. Because frankly, I was having a hard time doing it myself.
Nonviolent direct action training came into full force in that moment for me. It was really interesting. It was also extremely targeted at us, which was also what was so horrifying. It wasn't sort of just like general. It was really straightforward attacks directly at us as Black women and as a collective.
I mean, we're on the Zoom platform now, right? And I mean, this is the tricky nature of all of this, right? We at Color of Change have to push and demand better from Twitter and Facebook about how they engage in elections. And then we've got to go and use these platforms. We've got to sometimes challenge media outlets that then we have to rely on to tell our stories. And so these are absolutely the type of kind of battles that your parents either are currently fighting or have fought, and the sort of unique intersection. And so I'd love it if, some more of you could say more about that and more about sort of what was going through your mind in terms of what you thought you wanted to do next. Yes.
I have to say that I echo the sentiments of my sister Keisha in saying that if Gina hadn't stepped in and said something and centered us, because in me, I was feeling enraged. I was angry. My blood was boiling. I felt to the point where I was going to say something, but, what I probably would have exploded on probably wouldn't have been peaceful or nice or loving. And I was getting to that point where I was literally enraged and ready to, do something, to these people. I just couldn't believe it. And I felt disrespected. I felt shamed. I just felt like this was something that we were targeted for, and I didn't understand why.
I want to officially actually introduce Dr. Yasha Shabazz, who has joined us. She is a college professor and administrator. She is the daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz. Welcome to the conversation. Now, do we have all of the Daughters of the Movement now? Who are we missing?
We don't quite have all of us. There's Stacy Lynch, who's works for the mayor's office, who's very, very busy.
And Lynch, the daughter of Bill Lynch, is the woman who really convened us all together. Okay. She's the one who did the initial outreach to Keisha and I to create this space where we could come together as daughters of movement leaders and revolutionaries and thinkers, so that we had a space for ourselves to commune and to share.
We had a safe space, which has been so helpful in this crisis right now. We have been able to lean on one another. I cannot tell you what that's done for us. I want to say also that we do have the memory and the lessons of our parents, and we are pulling on that. My mother, her mother would say to her when something would happen like this, when they'd go into a store and they wouldn't let them try on a hat or something, she would say to her, these people have a disease, there's an illness. And she would say, you just move through it, you move past their disease, and you acknowledge that there's something wrong here. And my mother said she never took it into her body that there was something wrong with her. I believe that to a certain extent. I think that's our survivor in us. But I now know, and a lot of us now know, this next generation, things our parents didn't have time to look at. And that's that it does go in your body to some extent. And so I think part of what we did when we had our after conversation was breathe and heal this, let it out, let it go, let it move through us. And I know individually I did a lot of that work that next day. I just think we know tricks about how to keep ourselves mentally healthier. Our parents did not have time or the resources that are available to us now. We have to pull on this right now. You cannot let this stuff sit in your body. Do not let these people, do not let their sickness come into your body. Do your meditation, your walk, your community, your sense of community, what it takes so we can move through this, which we will do.
As a person who's very much paid attention to and studied the movement, I do have to move my head a bit and show you this picture behind me, Suzanne, which is your mother, on my wall right back there. This was not planned at all. I did not actually know at first that you were going to be able to join us. If we were in my office, we might see some of your other parents up on the walls. But I know that I think Dr. Hesna Muhammad, you were trying to get in to say something, I think.
I'm sorry to interrupt. And it's great that our parents are providing you with such resources, that you have them on your walls. But during our debriefing, we also talked about the Freedom Riders and the things that folks had to do during the Jim Crow South, and the training that they had, and the wherewithal and resilience that they had, knowing that they were going to be taunted and teased and beaten and hosed, etc., but going out anyway, and in order to make a change that had to come. So we recalled the Freedom Riders and what they had to encounter. And also, I'm thinking about James Baldwin, and it follows up on what Suzanne was saying. It is a disease. This is something that's wrong with those folks. You know, it's not our problem, only in as much as we all are community and we all are members of this world and need to work together. But that is a pathology that they carry in their attempt to subjugate other people and to exercise what they think is superiority. That's a problem and a flaw on their part. And I think that it's one of the things that we can do as the Daughters of the Movement and as folks in general is to help them recognize the fact that they need to address their behavior, because it's not in line with the type of behavior we need to move forward as a society. But we were able to definitely stand on the shoulders of those folks who had gone before and had experienced such things as this.
So, I'd love for people just to jump in, and we have some folks that haven't jumped in yet. What I want to talk about, right? So many people are now having to move their lives online, right? And having to change the dynamics of what they were once doing offline to online. And we are going to be encountering all sorts of new terrain. I oftentimes think of and talk about racism as like water pouring over a floor. It will find the holes, it will find the cracks, it will find the leaks. And here, the leaks and the cracks are being found in all sorts of ways. And we deal with the repercussions of it. And we end up having to fight. And so I guess what are the encouragements? What are the sort of things you want to say to folks who are now having to face this down and having to work in spite of it, right? Having to show up to work, to activism, to their life in spite of it, who may be feeling like it's just not worth it, right? In the midst of everything else that we are suffering.
I think what's happening is we are discovering that we need each other more than we don't.
Yeah.
Right. That we're finding that we need to feel connected, that we understand why our parents stood up against so many challenges, that they used their voices, that they were very much committed. And so now we're finding young people who are getting a new message, you know, and that message is compassion, care, community. The only way we're going to get change is when we stand up and we use our voices, and that we need one another to do that.
And also we have to be mindful of this wave of the digital divide. Education for our children has been inequitable since the beginning. And there have been attempts at making it more equitable. Brown versus the board, No Child Left Behind. But this is going to be a significant cause of a significant gap based on access. And I believe that that's one of the things we have to fight for, the access to the technology. And it's not a handout, give me the technology. We need to encourage our young folk, especially, to create the technology, to create the experiences and not have to rely on Zoom.
Yeah.
Let's make our own Zoom. And that's going to be the key, to keep our eye on that digital divide that is widening and widening and widening. I'm speaking to some of my educator friends who are talking to me about the students who can't learn because of this situation. And that's what we need to do. Instill in our students, they help them get that access and help them to do what's necessary to independently create platforms that so that they don't have to rely on Zoom, and other platforms like it.
We also need to encourage people, young people, whomever is experiencing this as we did, to not be afraid to use their voices. I mean, the way that, just think about, we can't come together and do a mass demonstration or rally to really put this out there and really amplify our voices together. So we have to do it. We have to find creative ways on how we can get our messaging out there in large numbers to say that this is not acceptable, enough is enough, and that we need to attack it in multiple facets. We need to be, hitting the boardrooms, hitting the corporations, saying, do you have people that represent us? Do you have people that look like us that are involved at the table and making the decisions, and not just using us to profit from us, but also being there to protect us? It's very important. And so I think that, amplifying our stories, encouraging people to share their stories if this is happening to you, if this has happened, share the story, talk about it, encourage our leaders, our Black leaders like you, Mr. Brother Robinson, to get on your mediums and to amplify our voices. We need you. We need leadership. We need guidance. We need people to fight for us and to stand for us, especially in a time when we are most vulnerable and don't know which way to turn or what to do.
And we need to also stand and let our young people know that we're here for them.
Yeah.
One of the challenges that I found with my students, here they were coming to class and sometimes looking in their telephones, and now each one of them shows up, and they're looking, they're yearning, they're frightened, they don't know what's going on. And so it's important that we also recognize that we have to be there for our young people and carry them on.
I think one of the things we can tell young people is that every forward movement that's happened in this country that's brought us closer to that declaration that was written, that wasn't abided by, has been because of us. It's always been the people on the margins who push America closer to its ideal. And so if they ever have a moment of feeling why me or what, yes, it's not fair. Yes, we have extra burden. We've always had extra burden, but we are kind of the hope of this country, always have been. And so they need to step up and speak. And they're not just doing it for their community. They're doing it for America. I mean, honestly.
Right. Most of those people were in their teens and 20s.
Right, exactly.
They were just in their teens and 20s, and they were
so many, making so many incredible sacrifices. So young. I mean, even what we call young now, right, were like grown people at the time, right? And so even all of those concepts, there were so many sort of amazing nuggets in everything you all said. And it's particularly around these questions of technology, both the ideas of building it ourselves, but also demanding that these boardrooms and these places are actually servicing us, the kind of desire to be connected to technology, the power of young people and young voice. One of the things as we've been sort of driving this campaign, and this is campaign on our staff, one of our campaign directors, Jade, a young sister, has been driving this, and she was on the call with me with the leadership at Zoom. And one of the things that was very interesting in the lead up of us trying to prepare was just this back and forth with Zoom, really about questions about who they have in the room, even when they build these products, right? The CEO said he never imagined that people would, want to break up people's gatherings. And I'm like, well, you probably never imagined it because that wouldn't be something you imagined. And Silicon Valley, which is a place that has such challenges with diversity, right? We have, and along with so many other folks, Reverend Jackson, many other folks have fought around diversity. Your father, Dominique, as well. Many of us have really pushed on Silicon Valley around its questions of diversity. I remember when we got Twitter to break down their race numbers, and finally, and they sent us back, and it was like 2% Black, and they had included the cafeteria workers, the janitors, and the security guards who were all fighting for a living wage at that time. And they've gotten a little bit better, and they've got some folks in there who I really respect, who are actually pushing and from the inside. But all of these companies have to do a better job of diversity. And right, diversity is not charity, it's strategy. Because if they had diversity at the core, they might have had someone in the room saying, you know, people might want to interrupt these things. Maybe we should have some controls. Another thing that they sent out to people, because you all weren't the only folks that got Zoom bombed. Right. One of the things that they sent out to people were this guide that said how to stop party crashers. And like almost that white nationalists were party crashers, right? Like this, like they're the same thing as like someone, you know, disrupting a baseball game by running on the field or something like that. That was the same sort of thing. And so in both of these situations, there was a level of tone deafness that came from the companies, a need for sort of greater diversity. There's a whole lot of nuggets of things that we are sort of fighting for. But at the heart of it, there's a call for young people, right? Young people to get involved. And I don't know if you all have anything to say about it, because it does any of those things I just said, because they really do draw on a lot of what you were all talking about, but really lay claim to why we have to be so vigilant even in this era.
Yeah. If I can just jump in, I want to say, I think it's, to me, what is really at the core of all of this, whether or not the white nationalists determine that they will, you know, Zoom bomb with pornography, misogyny, and other, you know, hateful images and language, whether it's corporations implementing diversity, inclusion, and equity strategies in a meaningful way. Whatever it is, it's the core value is, you know, whether people, the core nugget to me in all of this is values. Like, is your value one that holds in, you know, that holds love for all humanity, and one that can say, all right, well, I may not live in that person's humanity, but let me try to access that person's humanity. And if your values don't push you, and this is what is so important, is that, you know, we push everyone to develop values that embrace the totality of humanity, and the value therein, just because they are human beings. And you know, I've done diversity, inclusion, and equity work as well, in terms of consulting. And to me, the companies that really excel at it are the ones where the leadership, the very top, you know, push themselves outside of their own comfort zones and say, all right, I don't know everything. I'm not going to be the smartest person in the room. I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I don't know what it's like to grow up in Southeast Asia, or whatever it might be, that, you know, that they push themselves to access other people's reality. I've said, you know, that it's important for people to challenge themselves by just pushing for all of us to, you know, me as a Black woman, you know, do I have, yes, you know, if I don't know, I'm trying to think of a segment of people that I don't have, you know, in my core group or in my group of friends. But if there's some, you know, a segment of this population, like I just said, I don't know what it's like to grow up in Southeast Asia. That, for example, is somewhere I could go and say, what is that experience like? And that in and of itself kind of develops my appreciation and understanding for humanity as a whole. But as a corporate exercise, obviously, it's not obvious for some, as a corporate exercise, it's important that, you know, the companies, again, from the very top, the leaders are pushing their deputies to develop policy and strategy around creating environments, workplaces, et cetera, products, marketing that accesses all of America, at least if you're going to be an American company. If you're a global company, your reach is way beyond that. And I just want to say one last thing about what happened the other day. It was so, it was to me so appalling, because in this particular moment, as you articulated to some extent, Rashad, in this particular moment where Black and brown people are essentially being targeted or further at risk because of this disease, for us to try to pull together our community and create a safe space where we can have a little bit of peace in the way we would normally do, to your point around shifting our work to digital platforms. We would normally do this in a room as, you know, as a speaking engagement, if you will. We're pulling together our people to share, you know, the experiences and stories that our parents and grandparents passed down to us. My grandfather was a freedom rider, you know, et cetera, to share some of that with our folks in that moment. To be attacked in this way was a profoundly disgusting and hateful act.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you see that kind of vitriol, if you will, we do need to do what you've said, which is to elevate all of these causes, what each of us have said, which is to elevate all of these causes and make sure that, you know, our voices are heard.
I really appreciate that, and I'd love if people could pick up off of that. But one thing you said that I'd love if people could play with a little bit, if the other daughters could play with a little bit, is this idea of technology as a tool to connect, right? The idea that you talked about, like maybe not going someplace and not being in, you know, Southeast Asia. But technology actually has the potential. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about all the challenges because what we're facing, but, you know, all the stories from civil rights movements also layer in the ways in which technology helped, from, you know, the printing press and Frederick Douglass to the stories that, you know, the late Julian Bond told me as a youth organizer about how they installed the Watts line in the Shore University SNCC office, and Watts allowed them to bypass Ma Bell operators that were basically controlled in the South by KKK and white nationalists, the precursor to what we call white nationalists, and they controlled it. And so calls from like Howard to Tuskegee would be interrupted. Once they installed the Watts line, it allowed them to bypass all that, and calls didn't have to get transferred from operator to operator. And then we think about all the ways that social media powered or helped to provide tools, I should say, for Black Lives Matter and for people actually seeing what was happening on the ground in Ferguson, or better understanding what was happening in Sanford, Florida, and that combining with, you know, work that, you know, your father did, Dominique, and others, you know, all of those things intersect. And so I'd love for you also, as we're talking about this, to talk about the potential of technology and why in these moments where we have to be in our homes, the safe spaces that we need, the safe spaces that you all have, why this is also so important, and just really hammer that point home for people who may not be thinking about this.
Let me just say, if those young folks that you were talking about, they were born in the age of the internet, unlike some of us. So they have a level of technology and in their experiences growing up. And when you think about the current wave of activism, there are folks who were out there on the streets organizing, participating. I know Gina has plenty of stories of the things that she's done with the Women's March and others. And some of us relied on the technology to participate. They might press a like button or share a post or something like that. And I'm not trying to take away from that as a strategy for sharing information and participating. But I think that we need to help young folks ride, or we all need to ride this wave of new current activism, because it's not new, it's just now, because we've been dealing with activism since the kidnapping and enslavement and the whole Middle Passage, and we don't need to, we'll go through that. But we need to ride this current wave of activism and enfold the technology component of it. It's not enough, and we knew that, to just like something. And now we can't go out in the street and march, like Dominique said. But we need to engage our young folks in trying to find a way to use this platform and keep it safe. And just bring us to the next level of what this technology can do for us, because it's a very dangerous space if it's not used properly in terms of taking information, being exposed to certain things like we were exposed to. So I think it's important for us to incorporate the use of technology in our activism and bring it a little farther along than just pressing a like button. We got to figure that out, you know?
I'll take the like button. I think that there's a lot of young people that's a part of the process of entry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take the like button. I think that, when you look at the Arab Spring, or when you look at, as you said, Ferguson, what an extraordinary communicative tool the internet and social media is and was at that time, particularly in those two movements. I mean, when I think of the Arab Spring and Hassan Mahfouz just calling out to all the people to come to the square, and then they showed up and the Arab Spring began. And when I think of the young Palestinian freedom fighters that communicated to the young people in Ferguson on what to do because of the tear gas, because they had never experienced that before, the way in which the communication was able to come to each other so quickly and so fast was an amazing tool, and it remains so. I think we as a community, people of color, need to get more savvy on how to use these tools, because while we are doing what we're doing, the opposition is also figuring out ways in which to dismantle us. And this is not new either. So I think what's really important as it relates to technology is that we find more people who have the capacity and the resources to invest their own spaces, create their own spaces, or demand and join a movement like I hope we will be able to ignite here, on demanding that spaces are safe and also user-friendly for us all to be able to engage. I think that, as we see in many businesses, Black folk and people of color are always the last to get into the game, whether it's Silicon Valley or anywhere else. And I think it's important for those in our community who have resources, whether it's the church or whatever it is, other business men and women who have risen to a certain level of success, to invest their in research around how this can be expanded to communities of color in particular.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Say something, and then I'll pop it to you. I just wanted to say something about what youth can do right now if they have access to this technology. There's a divide sometimes between even certain Black and brown communities, just misunderstandings. And what I have seen happen through this technology is people have come together who were otherwise perhaps suspicious of one another. We need to be more than just separate silos. We are powerful in unity, of course. And this is a wonderful time, even now, while we're locked down like this, to find ways to connect with others of color, communities that we don't speak to one another enough, and share exactly what we were talking about. Find that commonality so that when we step out of this space and are out moving around again, we have more strength in those numbers. And that's something young people can do right now using their technology at home. It does take technology, but it doesn't take more than a computer,
Keisha?
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on what Gina just said and what Hesna said earlier, and some of what you said, Rashad, in terms of developing our own platforms. There was a little period of time in there, Rashad, that you, in your, talking about technology over time from print to social media, that you skipped over. Yeah. And it was the period where African Americans developed our own media outlets in the 70s and 80s. And my grandfather wrote an article, an essay rather, in a book called What Black Politicians Are Saying in 1972. This is at the same time that our family's business was founded, Inner City Broadcasting. We owned radio stations around the country, including WBLS in New York. very big radio station. For those who aren't familiar with it, he did so with the express purpose of moving the needle for our community. He didn't stumble into mass communications. The purpose, and he did exactly what you said, Gina, in terms of bringing together doctors, lawyers, teachers, Ilyasa's mom, Dr. Betty Shabazz, Roberta Flack, a number of different, African Americans who understood that what was important is that we had a platform to, in order to influence the conversation around our issues, and thereby influence policy making, politics, and what was happening in the corporate space as well. And that platform was a major factor in electing the first Black mayor of New York, along with Stacey Lynch's dad, Bill Lynch. But the point is that, and this, I guess, this ties into what Hesna had said earlier around our owning it, is, we've been using these social media platforms. And I remember when we lost our business in the Great Recession, we lost all our radio stations, and people said, well, we have social media. We can get together on their platforms. And I said, well, if we don't control it, we are going to be endangered at some point. And now, this is the next iteration of that. Now we're on Zoom, and we can't convene in a way without being threatened, literally without being threatened. And here we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable. So the answer, yes, is to develop these and other technology platforms that enable us to not just to convene, but also to serve our community and to organize our community, because that's what these assets have been used for over the centuries, is organizing our communities. So I salute you for leading the charge on holding Zoom accountable for the Zoom bombers' actions. And as everyone has said, we the Daughters of the Movement are on board to help move it along with you.
Well, I really appreciate that. We're going to have to wrap up because I think we have taken a lot of time, and I just really appreciate that last moment. Also, as someone who grew up with Hal Jackson's Sunday Morning Classics, my parents made sure I knew my music and could win that if I ever got on Jeopardy or Black Jeopardy or anything.
Jeopardy.
I just want to appreciate you. It is oftentimes said, and it can be said in ways that don't actually aren't meaningful, about the ways in which Black women have powered our movement, in the ways in which we hear like kind of chants about thank Black women at the end, which actually not sort of like real structural conversations about what that means. But what I want to sort of say in a very clear way is just a real appreciation for not just the spaces that you are trying to create for yourselves, but the spaces that you are trying to create for others, the ongoing teaching, learning, and growing, and all of that you are allowing us to do with you. And also opening yourself up for this conversation. I know that what happened was absolutely horrific. And we need sort of real structural change around it to make it better. But by you all sharing your story, by you all opening up about this, and also helping people understand a little bit more about why the impact was so real, hopefully it can help power more change, because that is what we're all here for. And so it's been an honor to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. I hope we can do this more and do this in person when we are not all stuck in our places, and find time to engage and more time to learn, think, grow, and share together. But until then, thank you. Keep fighting, keep working, and sending just a lot of love and appreciation from here in New York. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
In order to help us build more power to change what's happening on the Zoom platform, please sign the petition by going to colorofchange.org or theblackresponse.org. If you've experienced Zoom bombing, you can share your story with us by texting the word Zoom to 225568. That's the word Zoom to 225568. Sharing our stories will give us more energy and more power to help make a change what's happening now. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.